My phone connected to the base network before the wheels of our transport plane had stopped rolling, and the first thing I saw after 7 months overseas was a live video from the security camera above my front door. A real estate agent in a red coat was fastening an under-contract sign to the fence of my house, while my younger brother stood beside her, pointing toward the detached garage and saying, "The owner won't be coming back. She isn't capable of handling the property anymore." For 3 seconds I honestly thought exhaustion had scrambled my brain. Then the agent looked directly toward the camera, and I recognized the silver folder tucked under her arm. It held the original blueprints to the home my grandmother had left me, documents I kept locked in a fireproof cabinet inside my office. I called my brother before I even unbuckled my seatbelt. Logan answered on the second ring and sounded irritated rather than surprised. "You landed early," he said. Behind him I could hear cabinet doors closing inside my kitchen. "Why is there a sale sign in front of my house?" I asked. He exhaled as if I were a child delaying bedtime. "Because Mom signed the transfer papers. The closing is Friday morning. You need to stop pretending you can manage everything after what happened overseas." I looked around the aircraft at the people who had spent the last 7 months trusting me to protect classified communications across 3 countries. At 32, I was a major in the United States Air Force, assigned to a cyber operations squadron, and I had just completed a deployment during which I supervised more than 60 airmen and coordinated responses to attacks that could have shut down critical military systems. My brother was telling strangers I could not manage a 2-bedroom house. "What exactly did Mom sign?" I asked. Logan lowered his voice. "The power of attorney, the doctor's statement, the family agreement, all of it. She has authority now, Leah. You should be grateful we handled this before you came home and made things difficult." My mother's voice drifted through the background. "Don't upset her. You know, stress makes her confused." Logan must have thought I would yell. He knew I had been sleeping 4 hours a night during the last stage of the deployment. He knew our father had died 10 months earlier and that I had not been home for the funeral because my unit was already in transit. He knew I carried guilt about that every day. What he did not know was that people in my line of work learned to notice when a conversation was designed to provoke an emotional response. I pressed the record icon on my government-issued phone, kept my voice level, and said, "Send me every document you used." He laughed. "You don't need to review them. You're not the decision-maker anymore." Then he hung up. I did not call back. I did not threaten him. And I did not drive home in uniform to drag him off my property. I saved the camera footage, forwarded the recording to my personal encrypted account, and walked directly from the flight line to the legal assistance office. 40 minutes later, Captain Mara Ellis, an Air Force attorney with a calm face and the habit of rereading every page twice, was sitting across from me while I explained that the limited power of attorney I had given my mother before deployment was supposed to cover storm repairs, insurance inspections, and payment of local contractors. Mara asked one question before she said anything else. Did it authorize the sale or transfer of real property? No. Did it authorize medical decisions? No. Did you sign any document declaring yourself incompetent? Absolutely not. Mara opened a legal pad. Then we are not treating this as a family disagreement. We are treating it as suspected fraud, with an active real estate closing in less than 48 hours. Those words settled me more effectively than sympathy could have. By the time I left her office, I had a plan. We would notify the title company in writing, file an affidavit disputing the transfer authority, contact the county recorder, and preserve every piece of evidence before my family realized I was moving. The only thing I could not stop thinking about was the silver folder under the agent's arm. Someone had entered my locked office, opened my cabinet, and taken documents that only 3 people knew existed: me, my mother, and the locksmith who had installed the cabinet after my father died. I reached the house at dusk with Mara and 2 members of base security, not because the military had authority over a civilian property dispute, but because my brother had entered my home while I was away and I needed witnesses while I inspected it. Logan's SUV was gone. The real estate sign remained. My key still worked, but the moment the door opened, I knew the house had been searched. Nothing looked ransacked. That would have been easier. Instead, everything had been moved with deliberate care. My mail sat in neat piles organized by sender. Bank envelopes had been opened and resealed. The framed photograph of my father and me, at my Air Force commissioning ceremony, had been turned face down on the mantel. In the kitchen, someone had replaced the handwritten calendar, where I tracked repairs with a glossy binder labeled Carter Coastal Redevelopment. Logan's company name was printed across the cover. Inside were architectural renderings showing my house demolished and replaced by 3 luxury rental cottages. The estimated sale value was more than $1.8 million. My brother had not merely found a buyer. He planned to sell the property to a limited liability company he controlled, borrow against its future development value, and leave the paperwork looking like our mother had acted for my benefit. I found my office door unlocked. The fireproof cabinet showed no damage, which meant whoever opened it had either found my spare key or obtained a copy. The blueprints were gone, along with the original deed, my father's probate records, and the signed limited power of attorney I had left with my mother. On my desk sat a printed letter on the letterhead of a private behavioral clinic in Virginia. It stated that I was experiencing deployment-related disorientation, impaired judgment, and unresolved grief, and recommended that a trusted family member assume temporary control of my finances and housing decisions. The signature belonged to Dr. Evelyn Price, a psychologist I had met exactly once during a mandatory post-deployment wellness screening 2 years earlier. The letter was dated 3 weeks before my return, when I was still operating at a secure location overseas. My military medical record contained no such diagnosis. Mara photographed every page and told me not to touch anything else until civilian police arrived. While we waited, I walked through the hallway toward my father's workshop. He had spent 30 years repairing commercial fishing engines before arthritis forced him to stop, and after my grandmother left me the house, he helped me rebuild the garage into a workshop where we could work together. 6 months before his death, he carved a shallow line into the wooden workbench and said, "That marks the edge of your property on the old survey. Never let Logan convince you the garage belongs to the family. Your grandmother left this place to you because she knew you would preserve it." At the time, I had accused him of being dramatic. Now the bench had been cleared, and his tools were packed into boxes labeled auction. My mother had once told me Logan deserved the house more because he had children and I had a military housing allowance. She said it lightly, as though inheritance were a prize that should go to the person with the most expensive lifestyle. I had answered that the property was not available, and I believed the matter was closed. Standing there among my father's boxed tools, I finally understood that she had never accepted my answer. The county officers arrived and took an initial report. One of them examined the clinic letter and asked whether I had recently threatened anyone or received an emergency mental health evaluation. "No," I said. "I was cleared for duty, carried a weapon when required, supervised classified operations, and passed my post-deployment screening this afternoon." He nodded and wrote it down. That simple sequence mattered. My family's accusation was now being measured against documented reality instead of emotion. Later that evening, Mara received confirmation that the title company had frozen the closing, pending investigation. I thought that would force Logan to retreat. Instead, at 9:17 p.m., my mother called and said, "You have embarrassed us in front of professionals. Logan had investors expecting that property. Do you understand what your selfishness has cost him?" I put the call on speaker while Mara listened. "Mom, did I authorize you to sell my house?" There was a pause. "You authorized me to act in your best interest. Did I authorize a transfer to Logan's company?" "You were unavailable." "Did you give him the key to my office cabinet?" Her breathing changed. "Your father would be ashamed of the way you are interrogating me." I repeated the question. She hung up. Mara looked at the dark phone screen and said, "She answered without answering." Then an email arrived from the title company containing the documents Logan had submitted. The power of attorney looked almost identical to mine until page 4. My original page 4 limited my mother's authority to repairs and insurance. The submitted page 4 authorized her to sell, mortgage, transfer, or encumber any property in my name. My initials appeared at the bottom, but the page had been printed on a different machine, and the notary acknowledgement was dated 4 months after I had deployed. The notary was a woman named Celeste Morgan. I recognized the name immediately. She had worked with my mother for 15 years at an escrow office before retiring. The mystery was no longer whether the document had been altered. The mystery was how many people had helped. The next morning, instead of going home to confront my family, I reported to the County Financial Crimes Unit with Mara and turned over the forged document, camera footage, recorded phone calls, medical letter, and redevelopment binder. Detective Owen Blake, a former state fraud investigator with a careful way of asking the same question from 3 directions, warned me that a frozen closing did not mean the danger had passed. If they have one altered power of attorney, they may have used it elsewhere, he said. He advised me to check my credit reports, bank accounts, insurance policies, and any property associated with my name. Within 2 hours, we found 4 inquiries I had never authorized, a home equity application against the property, and a business credit line listing me as a guarantor for Carter Coastal Redevelopment. The credit line had been rejected because the lender could not verify my signature, but the home equity application was still pending. Logan had created a financial structure that depended on the house being transferred to his company before anyone looked too closely. He was not trying to sell it for cash alone. He was trying to turn the property into collateral for debts he had already accumulated. The clinic letter created another problem. Dr. Price's office confirmed she had not written it, but the signature was an accurate digital copy taken from an old patient form. Someone had accessed enough of my personal information to know which provider I had seen, when I had seen her, and what kind of language would sound plausible. The investigator asked who could have obtained my records. My first instinct was to blame my mother, but Mara stopped me before I speculated. "We prove what happened," she said. "We do not fill gaps because the answer feels obvious." That became the rule I followed for the rest of the week. I changed every password, locked my credit, moved sensitive mail to a secure box, replaced the cabinet lock, and documented each contact. I also called my squadron commander and explained the civilian fraud investigation, so there would be no opportunity for my family to surprise the chain of command with false claims about my stability. My commander did not offer to fight the case for me. He simply ensured my duty status, medical clearance, and deployment performance records were preserved and available through the appropriate channels. That distinction mattered. I was not using my rank to crush my family. I was using accurate records to prevent them from turning my service into a weapon. By Friday, the original closing date, Logan had begun calling relatives. My aunt texted, "Your mother says you came home paranoid and are accusing everyone of crimes." A cousin wrote, "Logan was only trying to keep the property in the family." I answered none of them. Then my 10-year-old niece, Sophie, called from her school's front office. Her voice was low. "Aunt Leah, Dad says you're going to a hospital and that we might live in your house. Is that true?" For the first time since landing, I had to stop and close my eyes before speaking. Sophie had spent summers in my workshop painting wooden boats with my father. She knew every hiding place in the garage. "No, sweetheart," I said. "I am healthy, and nobody is taking me to a hospital. The adults are dealing with paperwork, and none of this is your responsibility," she whispered. "Dad said if I talked to you, I was choosing your side." I asked to speak with the school counselor, explained that Sophie had been pulled into an adult legal dispute, and requested that the counselor document the call. I did not tell Sophie her father was a criminal. I did not ask her to spy or repeat conversations. Children were not evidence-gathering devices. That afternoon, Detective Blake called with a discovery that changed the direction of the case. Logan had submitted the altered power of attorney through an online title portal using an email address associated with Celeste Morgan, the retired notary. The upload metadata showed the files had been created on a computer registered to my mother's home internet account. That placed all 3 of them near the document, but it still did not identify the architect. Then, the detective found a series of deleted messages recovered from Logan's business cloud account. One read, "Mom keeps asking whether Leah can reverse this when she gets home. Tell her the medical letter protects us." Another said, "Celeste wants another $5,000 before she stamps the deed. Pay her after the loan clears." A third, sent to an unknown number, said, "Once the house is in the LLC, Mom's place is next. She signed the guarantee without reading it." Detective Blake slid a printed copy across the table. "Do you recognize the address connected to the guarantee?" I did. It was my mother's home, the one she and my father had paid off after 38 years. Logan had persuaded her to help steal my house while quietly pledging hers as backup collateral. That was the moment I understood the shape of his plan. My mother was guilty, but she was not his partner in the way she believed. She was another asset he intended to use until nothing remained. 3 days later, my mother came to the base visitor center, carrying a canvas bag and wearing the same navy sweater she had worn at my father's memorial service. She had asked to meet alone. I refused and brought Mara. Mom sat across from us with her handbag clenched against her ribs. For several minutes she said nothing. Then she placed a stack of printed emails on the table and asked, "Is Logan using my house for a loan?" I did not soften the answer. "The investigators found a guarantee bearing your signature. Did you sign it?" "He brought papers after dinner. He said they were related to your property taxes." "Did you read them?" Her eyes dropped. "No." Mara asked whether she had participated in altering my power of attorney. Mom's mouth tightened. "I gave Celeste the original. Logan said the language was too narrow and that you had made a mistake. Celeste replaced one page." "Did you know the new page allowed the sale of my home?" I asked. "Logan said it was temporary. He said the company would buy the property, refinance it, and transfer it back after the investors were paid." "Did you know he told the buyer I was mentally incompetent?" "He said we needed a reason you couldn't appear at closing. Did you help him obtain the old medical form?" She began crying before she answered. "Your father kept copies of everything. Logan found the clinic paperwork in the file cabinet after the funeral." My mother had crossed a legal and moral line because she wanted to believe my brother's business could be saved. She had watched him fail at a restaurant, a boat rental company, and 2 renovation projects, and each time she called the disaster bad luck. I had been expected to lend money because I was single, because I had benefits, because I had no children, because my career was stable. When I refused to guarantee his latest project, Logan convinced her that I was abandoning the family. She admitted that they had planned to move me into a private wellness residence for 2 weeks while the title transfer was completed. The facility had never agreed to accept me involuntarily. Logan intended to use the reservation confirmation as evidence that I had voluntarily entered treatment. "I thought you needed rest," Mom said. "You sounded distant on your calls. You missed your father's funeral. You barely cried when we told you he was gone." I stared at her until she looked away. "I was in a secure operations center when Dad died. I was not allowed to leave the room, make a personal call, or tell anyone where I was. I cried after my shift because 60 people still needed me to do my job first. You turned my discipline into proof that I was broken." She pressed both hands to her face. I wanted to feel relief when she finally admitted what she had done, but there was only a deep stillness. An apology could not unforge a signature. Grief could not restore trust. Mara explained that the criminal case belonged to the state and that cooperation might affect how prosecutors evaluated my mother's role, but neither I nor my mother controlled whether charges were filed. Mom asked me to speak to Logan before the police arrested him. "He has children," she said. "Sophie and Ben will lose their father. They are already losing him," I answered. "He is teaching Sophie that love means helping someone take what is not theirs." She flinched. I continued, "I will make sure the children have safe adults around them. I will not destroy evidence or lie for him." My mother opened the canvas bag. Inside were my original deed, my father's probate file, the missing cabinet key, and a small external drive. Logan had left the drive at her house after copying records from my office. It contained scans of my passport, tax returns, military orders, insurance statements, and signatures. It also held a spreadsheet tracking every debt Logan hoped to pay after the property transfer, including money owed to private lenders who were already threatening lawsuits. The last column was titled Exit Plan. Under my name, he had written, "Relocate to treatment center. Challenge capacity if she resists." Under my mother's name, he had written, "Use house guarantee. Blame misunderstanding if questioned." My mother read the line twice and went pale. "He planned to blame me." "Yes," I said. "The same way he planned to blame me." She agreed to give a formal statement. Before leaving, she asked whether I would ever forgive her. "I don't know," I said. And for once, I did not offer comfort I did not feel. That evening, Detective Blake told us the prosecutor had approved search warrants for Logan's office, Celeste's home computer, and the escrow records connected to the attempted sale. They also had evidence Logan was arranging a second closing with another private lender. Believing the first title company had only delayed him because of a technical issue, the investigator wanted him to continue toward that meeting long enough to document his intent. I agreed to participate in one controlled call. Logan answered with forced warmth and said, "I knew you would calm down eventually." I told him I was tired, overwhelmed, and willing to sign a settlement if he guaranteed Mom's house would not be touched. He replied immediately, "Mom's property has nothing to do with this." That lie was the final confirmation the investigators needed. We scheduled the meeting for Monday morning at the office of a private lender near Baltimore. Logan believed he was going there to rescue his development. I was going there to end it. The lender's conference room had glass walls, a polished walnut table, and a view of traffic moving slowly along the harbor. Logan arrived 20 minutes early in a tailored gray suit, carrying a leather portfolio he had purchased with funds from his failing company. Celeste Morgan came with him. She was a compact woman in her late 50s, whose notary commission should have represented impartial verification, not a tool for laundering a family lie. She avoided my eyes and arranged her stamp, journal, and identification guide in front of her, as though careful organization could make the documents legitimate. My mother entered next with Mara and took a chair at the far end of the table. Logan's confidence faltered when he saw her, but he recovered quickly. "Good," he said. "We can resolve everything as a family." The lender's attorney asked whether I had reviewed the proposed transfer. "I have," I said. "I want Logan to explain it first." He smiled, grateful for the opportunity to perform. According to him, my home would be transferred to Carter Coastal Redevelopment at a discounted price because the property required modernization. The company would obtain construction financing, pay my mother a consulting fee, place me in a more manageable residence, and eventually provide me with monthly income. He described the arrangement as protective. He did not mention the demolition plans, the outstanding judgments against his company, the private lenders, the guarantee against my mother's home, or the altered medical letter. I let him finish. Then I asked, "Why does the transfer agreement say I am unable to manage my affairs?" Logan folded his hands. "Because you have struggled since deployment." "Who evaluated me?" "You were evaluated through the military." "By whom?" "I don't have the name in front of me." I turned to Celeste. "Did I appear before you when this power of attorney was notarized?" Her fingers touched the edge of her journal. "Your mother appeared as your authorized representative." The lender's attorney frowned. "A representative cannot acknowledge the principal's signature unless the applicable procedure and document permit it." "Did Major Carter personally acknowledge this signature?" Celeste looked at Logan. He answered for her. "We are getting lost in details." I opened the folder Mara had placed beside me and removed the original power of attorney. "This is the document I signed. Page 4 limits my mother's authority to repairs, insurance, and contractor payments. The page you submitted authorizes a sale. The font, printer marks, and document metadata are different." Logan's expression hardened. "You are confused about what you signed." I slid my active duty medical clearance and deployment evaluation onto the table. I was cleared for duty before, during, and after deployment. The psychologist whose signature appears on your letter has sworn she did not write it. Celeste stood so abruptly her chair rolled backward. "I was told the doctor approved it." My mother spoke from the end of the table. "No, you were paid to stamp it." Logan turned on her. "Mom, be careful." She placed a copy of his exit plan spreadsheet on the table. "You used my house as collateral." For the first time he had no immediate answer. He looked at me, then at Mara, then toward the conference room door. Detective Blake entered with 2 uniformed officers and an investigator from the State Notary Division. No one shouted. No one slammed a badge onto the table. Blake identified himself, informed Logan that warrants had been executed that morning, and asked him to remain seated. The investigator collected Celeste's journal and stamp pursuant to the warrant. The lender's attorney quietly moved the unsigned documents away. Logan stared at me as if I had betrayed him. "You set me up," he said. "You forged my name, entered my home, falsified a medical letter, tried to transfer my property, and pledged Mom's house without telling her," I replied. "I preserved the evidence." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Think about Sophie and Ben. You want them to see their father arrested?" "I wanted them to see their father make a different choice." His face twisted. "You always thought you were better than us because of that uniform." "No, I thought my house belonged to me because the deed says it does." Detective Blake told Logan he was being taken into custody on charges authorized by the state prosecutor, including attempted real estate fraud, forgery, identity theft, and conspiracy. He advised him of his rights. Celeste began crying and asked whether cooperation would help her. The investigator told her that was a conversation for her attorney and the prosecutor. My mother covered her mouth when the officers handcuffed Logan. I watched without satisfaction. There was no music, no cheering, no sense that my father's workshop had been restored merely because my brother was leaving in custody. There was only consequence, plain and irreversible. Before he reached the door, Logan looked back and said, "The family will never forgive you." I answered, "The family was not your shield to use." After he was gone, the lender formally terminated the transaction and preserved its records for investigators. The title company withdrew every pending filing associated with the forged documents. Mara explained that cleaning the property record would still take time, and my credit disputes would not disappear overnight. Real justice did not arrive as a single dramatic gesture. It arrived as signatures corrected, liens released, licenses suspended, evidence authenticated, and people required to answer questions they had spent months avoiding. As we left the conference room, my mother tried to take my arm. I stepped aside. "I gave them the drive," she said. "I told the truth." "You did what you should have done before you helped him." Her shoulders folded inward. "What happens to me now?" "The prosecutor decides what charges are supported. Your lawyer will speak for you." "And us?" she asked. I looked through the glass at the empty chair where Logan had been sitting. "That decision belongs to me." 6 months later, Logan pleaded guilty to attempted real estate fraud, aggravated identity theft, and 2 forgery counts after investigators connected him to additional false loan applications involving his former business partners. His plea required restitution, the sale of his remaining company assets, and a prison sentence the judge said reflected both the planning involved and his attempt to exploit claims about my mental health. Celeste surrendered her notary commission, pleaded guilty to falsifying acknowledgments, and agreed to testify about the altered documents. My mother was charged with conspiracy and unlawful use of personal identifying information. Because she cooperated early, returned the stolen records, and provided the drive that exposed the wider scheme, she received probation, community service, and a restitution order, rather than incarceration. The court also prohibited her from acting under any power of attorney or accessing my financial records. I did not request those outcomes, and I did not have the power to grant or withhold them. I gave the investigators truthful evidence and allowed the legal process to do what my family had insisted only I could decide. Sophie and Ben stayed with their mother, who had separated from Logan months before the attempted sale and had known nothing about the scheme. With her permission, I continued seeing them. I never asked the children to choose between us. When Sophie asked why her father was away, I told her, "He made serious decisions that hurt people, and a judge decided he had to face the consequences." She cried, and I held her. Protecting a child did not require pretending her parent had done nothing wrong. My mother wrote me letters every week. For a long time, I left them unopened in a drawer. Eventually, I read one in which she admitted that she had always treated my stability as a family resource. Because I had a career, savings, and no children, she assumed I could absorb every emergency Logan created. When I established boundaries, she called me cold. When I remained calm after Dad's death, she called me damaged. When I refused to surrender the house, she called me selfish. "I changed the meaning of everything you did until it justified what I wanted," she wrote. It was the first apology she had offered without asking me to rescue her from the result. I still did not invite her back into my life. Forgiveness, if it came, would not be a key to my house or access to my accounts. It would be something I carried privately, at a distance I controlled. The property record was finally cleared in early spring. On the morning the county confirmed that every fraudulent filing had been removed, I drove home in civilian clothes and found the old under contract sign leaning against the side of the garage. The police had returned it after the evidence photographs were completed. I carried it into my father's workshop, placed it across 2 sawhorses, and cut it into narrow strips with his old table saw. Sophie and Ben helped me sand the pieces. We used the wood to build a pair of shelves for the tools their grandfather had left behind. Later, while they painted the shelf brackets, Sophie pointed to the carved survey line on the workbench and asked why it was there. I told her the story of her grandfather warning me never to let anyone confuse family love with ownership. She considered that and said, "Dad thought being family meant you had to say yes." "A lot of people think that," I said. "But a real yes only means something when you are allowed to say no." That evening, after the children went home, I stood alone in the doorway of the garage. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt like a museum for my father or a battlefield my brother had abandoned. It felt like mine again. The next morning, I stopped at a coffee shop outside the base before reporting for duty. When the cashier turned the tablet toward me, my card went through immediately. The purchase was only $4.73, but I watched the approval appear on the screen and thought about how quickly a small refusal had exposed a much larger theft. The cashier handed me the cup and said, "Have a good morning, ma'am." I stepped outside, where the first aircraft of the day was lifting through the pale sky, and called Mara to tell her the final title correction had posted. Then I called the contractor who would repair the roof, using a new limited agreement drafted so clearly that no one could mistake what authority it gave. I had spent my career protecting systems by controlling access, verifying identity, and refusing to trust a claim merely because it came from a familiar source. My greatest mistake had been believing those rules did not apply to the people who shared my name. They did. Trust was not inherited. Authority was not love. And being someone's daughter, sister, or mother never gave them the right to rewrite another person's life.